Welcome to Sketchbook Legends. I'm your artist, Paul Hostetler. Today we're drawing the other hero of Patrick O'Brien's series of naval adventure novels, Stephen Maturin, played by, I'm not drawing the version that's played by Paul Bettany in the 2003 movie Master and Commander. For my money, Paul Bettany's just a little too tall and handsome, as people named Paul tend to be, to play Stephen Maturin, who in the books is described as a tiny, short, weedy-looking fellow with bad hygiene and scrabbly hair. I believe at one point it's mentioned that he only weighs 9 stone. That adds up in today's measurements to about 126 pounds, which is no great amount, though it is, I'll admit, about what I weigh. In the books, Stephen Maturin is half Catalonian and half Irish. There's a subplot in the first book, Master and Commander, where he's torn between his ideals of loyalty to the British government, or maybe not loyalty, but his raw hatred of Napoleon, and his loyalty to the cause of Irish independence, which is represented in the form of, I think, a lieutenant or something who's also an Irish rebel who's escaped detection and who's required to do a number of anti-Irish actions according to his duties as a British naval officer. And that pisses him off, and it pisses Stephen off, and neither of them can actually say anything about it at the time. But it's really the Catalan side of Stephen's nature that really propels quite a lot of the novels, given that he can speak Spanish and Catalan and is a native to the area. And it just so happens that that area happens to be in pretty much permanent contention for British and French control throughout books which deal with both Napoleonic Wars. There's like a moderate piece for a couple of books that I'm sure Patio was quite glad when history caught up to that not happening anymore. Quite a lot of the plot of the Aubrey Maturin books revolves around Stephen's intelligence gathering, since being a native to the islands and the coastline of the area, he's recruited by British intelligence to, act spy-like. I can't tell how much of this is historically accurate. What did spies do during the Napoleonic Wars? But it seems that quite a lot of his job is just him counting ships and also intercepting and passing on various bits of information which may be conducive to the British war effort or harmful to the French war effort. And since there are 20 books in the series, and naval battles can only take up so many pages, a lot of the heavy lifting story-wise lands on poor Mr. Maturin's weedy shoulders. Now you'll notice I've got my Stephen looking very thinned, but I've also got him holding a bunch of unknown objects which I'm going to turn into various animals, because the other side of Stephen's personality is that he is a natural philosopher in the parlance of their time. I guess we'd call it gentleman biologist. He's known and a member of the Royal Society, which I take was a society, and possibly still is a society of scientists and adventurers and explorers and such. I think it was mentioned in one of the Paddington movies. Unfortunately, his job as naval surgeon on all of Jack Aubrey's ships allows him the privilege of traveling all across the world to collect specimens and observe nature, even if, he always complains that naval life requires him to cut his studies short in any one particular location or habitat. I think the only time that he mentions having enough time is when the entire ship gets marooned on a place called Desolation Island, which I looked up. And while Desolation Island isn't a real thing, it is based on an actual island sort of south of New Zealand, in between New Zealand and Antarctica, and it's home to a whole bunch of seals and walruses and penguins and puffins and rare birds. And this was known to sailors at the time, and they'd come onto the island and plant cabbages so that they could come by and collect them later. And they also utterly decimated the population of every single other living thing on the island. It was just a good place for them to stock up, especially given how far Desolation Island is from anywhere else that might have fresh meat. One thing I have to give Patrick O'Brien kudos on is that he doesn't sugarcoat or romanticize travel in the age of sail. He, I think, pretty accurately portrays both the good and the bad of the era. On one hand, there was a lot more freedom, a lot less restriction on what you could and couldn't do, if you were a landowning white male. But on the other hand, there were a lot of social restrictions, and obviously the medical and travel technology were not nearly as refined as what they are today. It would be extremely uncomfortable for anyone today to have to deal with what they dealt with back in the 17 and 1800s when it came to traveling long distances across oceans and seas. All right, I'm drawing a little bit of a turtle there. I'm not actually sure how much tortoises weigh. I have no idea if a turtle the size of a large watermelon would actually be too heavy for a 126-pound man to pick up with one arm. But I'm going for it, because there is a point in one novel where Stephen names a new species of tortoise that he's discovered, Testudo aubrei, after his good friend and captain, Jack Aubrey. It's a very sweet moment as far as sweet moments with Stephen go. He's not an overly sentimental fellow, and in fact, a lot of the time he's cantankerous and ornery and cranky and a bit of an asshole. But, we forgive him. Or at least Jack usually does. They did almost nearly come to fighting duels against each other twice in the books. In Master and Commander, they meet when Stephen challenges Jack to a duel. I can't remember if it's Stephen challenging Jack or Jack challenging Stephen, but it's because Jack is a little bit too loud and boisterous in his ham-boning during a concert, and Stephen calls him out on his rudeness. All is forgiven the next day because Jack gets his promotion to Master and Commander, which makes him very happy and unlikely to fight anybody. And the second one, they fight over a lady, Diana Villiers. Jack eventually gives up on her and marries her cousin Sophie, who's a much nicer person, I'll have to say. And Stephen sort of drags his feet with Diana over like 6 or 7 books until they're finally married in The Surgeon's Mate. Which, you know, from the title, you get that it has a couple of different meanings. Oh, the surgeon's mate. That means the surgeon's assistant and the surgeon's best friend, and also the surgeon's wife. Have I mentioned that Stephen Maturin is the ship's surgeon yet? He is, and in the first book and in the movie, he fixes a head wound by nailing a silver dollar onto a guy's skull, and everybody's very impressed when he points out that's what brains look like, and they think he's kind of almost magical from there on out. I mean, it is a 1700s, 18th century story, and I think Patty O has a great time sort of pointing out all of the medical inaccuracies in Stephen's practice, from regular bleeding. You know, you just stab someone and let them bleed into a bucket for a little while for their own health. That's a thing he does. Let's see. He also, I think, still believes a little bit in the 4 humors. Sometimes he'll give the sailors, who he complains are all hypochondriacs, he'll give them like powdered chalk as medicine, which, you know, he says it's placebo. I believe him. But he also is famous for his opium intake, being a little bit of an addict. At various times through the series, it's said that he takes 1,000 drops of opium daily. Later on, it said his regular dose is 18,000 drops. And if that seems like a lot, it is, because the standard dose for pain relief in those days was 25 drops. But Stephen's just knocking back that laudanum. And I can't imagine it's very healthy for him. But later on, he also gets addicted to coca leaves, aka cocaine. That can't be great for him either. And he's also a habitual smoker, which Diana Villiers, once she agrees to marry him, she's like, no, absolutely not. You cannot smoke in bed. And so he takes a room at the local hotel or hostel or YMCA or whatever it's called in those days. It is one of those things that I feel like would be useful in the modern day. Would be very, we should bring it back as the kind of hotel where you can stay long term, and more importantly, where a person of relatively low income can stay long term without a lease. They don't really have that anymore, at least in America. And I feel like that would be, you know, an extremely useful thing, not only for travelers, but for people who are new in a city, commuters, movers. Everyone needs a place to stay for a little bit longer than just a couple of days, that they can afford to actually live there and not feel like they're just visitors. In the Aubrey Maturin books, it's called The Grapes, and it's within this compound called the Savoy, which I believe for legal reasons the British government is unable to arrest anyone on the grounds of the Savoy. I think there was like some contention between nobles in the Middle Ages, and they struck a deal where that was the stalemate, and that lasted at least until the 1800s. And it saved Stephen and Jack's bacon. At least once, probably 2 or 3 times, but I haven't read all of the novels yet. I'm about halfway through. Now I'm using my Kuretake brush pen here to render Stephen. Just as I did Jack, I feel like they're a team. The pieces ought to go together, so I'm using the same sort of techniques to draw both of them. That means that later on, all of these ink lines will get a little bit of texturing with a China marker. And while Jack, I drew him up on the fighting top of a ship, Stephen is about as lubberly as they come, so I'm drawing him on terra firma among his beloved wild animals and birds. Now, I cannot pinpoint to you exactly where this is because I'm drawing a whole mess of different kinds of birds here. We got like some penguins, we got a duck, we got a seagull or something, and a turtle. You can see in his shirt pockets, I've got like newts and spiders and worms all crammed up in there. So I have no idea where this is, but I'm sure he's in heaven. You'll also note that one of those birds, that seagull, is carrying away Stephen's wig. Being a naval surgeon, there's a uniform that goes along with that, and the British still kind of hang on to these old-timey uniforms. If you watch any British legal drama, you'll notice all the judges and the lawyers wear wigs. That's just part of the professional outfit. Back in the day, the surgeons were supposed to wear wigs too. And also the naval officers during formal events. So Stephen has his wig. When we first meet him, his wig is made out of like wire, I think. Later on, he earns enough to buy a wig made out of hair. But we've got a bird carrying it directly off his head, because that is more or less the amount that Stephen cares about his own appearance. You can see he's got a little stubble on his chin. He's gone barefoot. He doesn't even have stockings on. And the ruffles on his collar are untidy. It seems like a good place for a cat break. Thank you for your input, Eddie. Alright, you notice that I'm also drawing a rat. Now, a lot of the problems, ecologically, in a lot of the world, especially places like Australia and New Zealand, come from sailors carrying vermin in the holds of their ships. They've got rats down there. When they're ashore, the rats come ashore also. And if the place, the island, the undiscovered country didn't already have rats, well, it has rats now. And rats eat pretty much anything. Eggs, baby animals, grain, insects, fruit. I believe in Australia, the rats became so much of a problem that they also imported poisonous toads to eat the rats. Poisonous toads didn't care for the rats and started eating also the baby animals and the eggs and the important insects and stuff. So now they've got a rat problem in Australia and a poisonous toad problem. Look up cane toads and you'll learn all about it. It's a lesson in human humility in the face of nature. Frankly, the whole idea of sending animals to where they don't belong is an immense act of hubris, one that happens all the time in the Aubrey Maturin novels, and along with, all the medical mistakes and warfare and murder and unsavory naval practices. One of the things you're just like, I can't wait for you people to learn better, is how often they just scoop up animals and take them wherever they feel might be convenient. Now, I've mentioned Stephen the surgeon, the naturalist, the intelligence agent. How about Stephen Maturin, the Mary Sue? That's right. Patrick O'Brien wrote 20 books about Aubrey and Maturin. And you can tell around book 8, he might have realized that he wasn't going to have quite enough for them to do. And that if he kept putting them in unusual situations, sooner or later, one of them was just going to bite the bullet and keel over dead. His solution was just to make Stephen absurdly competent in an absurd number of fields. I mean, not only is he a natural philosopher and a surgeon and very well versed in all the lingo and the names and the Latin that might go along with that, he's also a reasonably accomplished cellist. He's an expert marksman. He's an expert sword fighter. He's an expert cryptographer. That leads right back into the intelligence. He keeps his diary in code and comes up with a bunch of ingenious codes to encode all of his secret messages, and he breaks other people's codes in order to decode and recode their secret messages for his own purposes, to thwart Napoleon. He's also, it turns out, a wealthy landowner in the Catalan countryside. He's got a castle with a marble bathing house that he doesn't look after. It's implied that this castle is half in ruins and that all the people who rent land from him are several years out of date in their payments. But he doesn't really care about that. He's said to be extremely bad with money. He doesn't take payment for his intelligence services, which once or twice saves his bacon, because the only way you can tell whether someone is a spy, if you have access to the payrolls, is to see, they're on the payroll of the intelligence service. Since Stephen doesn't get paid for his services, he's not on the rolls, and, well, I'm not quite sure, but I think that'll save his bacon later on in the book that I'm reading. He can also speak not only English, but French, Catalan, Spanish, Irish, Latin, Greek, and he throughout the novels, he learns enough to be conversational in Malay, Urdu, and Arabic. And yet, for all his brilliance, at no point does he ever learn enough to be conversant with any of the sailors. in any sort of nautical term. And I think that's Patio's way of knocking him down to size, keeping him human, is that this is a fellow who is not supposed to be on a boat at all. There's a running joke where he can't even get into a boat without falling into the water. It takes at least 2 people to sort of carry him from the boat to the land, or even from a boat to another boat. That's how incompetent he is nautically, which, you know, if you have a guy who can speak Urdu and Catalan and name a tortoise after his best friend, and also, you know, win multiple duels, not against Jack, but, you know, situations arise. He's got to have himself some decent flaws. His lack of nautical talent, and definitely his addiction to various drugs that fits the bill. Kind of turns him into a Sherlock Holmes style character. Although with the Sherlock Holmes friendship, Watson is the doctor, Holmes is the detective. In the Aubrey Maturin buddyship, Stephen's the doctor, Aubrey is the boat captain, which I think is a fairer pairing considering the stories that they tell. When you're telling detective stories, the detective is going to end up being the main character. But when you're telling naval warfare stories, there's both a naval battle, a sailing, and an espionage and intrigue angle that can be exploited, which makes them, Jack and Stephen, a little bit more even in terms of how much attention gets paid to them over the course of the series. There isn't any Watsonification where one of them just gets stupider and dopier and more comic reliefy for the sake of just, you know, having something different going on other than one guy being incredibly competent the entire time. I've rendered the surprise out there in the distance in pencil. I think I may go over that again with China marker in a little bit. We'll see how I feel about it. And adding a little texture, a little color to these flightless birds down at Stephen's feet. Now, if you've only seen the 2003 Master and Commander movie, a lot of the prior information may come as a little bit of a shock to you. But, you know, it's a 2-hour movie. You're dealing with a character that was built up over the course of 20 books. And I think really got fully fleshed, at least in book 2 or 3. That's still several hundred pages of character building that you don't really have time for in a movie. So they kind of cut out everything about Stephen Maturin, except for the part about him being Aubrey's friend, the ship surgeon, and a naturalist. Sorry, a natural philosopher. In the same way that they cut out everything about how much of an idiot Jack is when he's not on his ship. You can see him using my China marker. I decided, in fact, that I was going to render that frigate in marker. It's not necessarily the best tool for it. That China marker is pretty blunt. You can't get the nice crisp lines that a naval frigate requires. But once again, you know, I wanted the two pieces to go together, Jack and Stephen, and I did Jack with these materials and the C in China marker, so I'm putting Stephen in much the same area, for better or for worse. I'll admit that I did use some reference in drawing that frigate. Hopefully there are enough of the lines in the right place that I won't get dinged on the Tall Ships Reddit for doing the surprise wrong. The surprise is the ship they take to the Galapagos. Jack Aubrey has like a dozen ships under his command over the course of the books. The surprise is clearly his favorite. Clearly. It's the only one he commands more than twice. I feel like it's often underestimated how much film, how much movies are a short story media. There's not a lot of information that you can convey in 2 hours. You really only have time to make 1 or 2 solid points and to build a world around those points and a story around those points. And in Master and Commander, the movie, that point is about duty and service. And I'm running over everything with a little whiteout pen, a deleter whiteout pen, just to add a little bit extra clarity where the China marker couldn't be counted on. Now, in terms of historical costuming, I did John Adams, I did Jack Aubrey. At this point, I'm kind of making up what Stephen Maturin's wearing. I know that the pants look a little balloony, the breeches, but I figure Stephen is known for taking such horrible care of his own clothes that he might actually be, in fact, wearing somebody else's pantaloons at this point and just cinching them with a rope or something. And that's Stephen Maturin from Patrick O'Brian's series of nautical adventure novels, The Aubrey Maturin Chronicles. If you like this video, click the like button, click the subscribe button. If you have suggestions or ideas for what I should draw next, leave a comment below. If you'd like to see a little bit more of my art and throw some money my way, I've got a TeePublic store, a link in the description, and if you'd like to see these videos early, you can do so on my Patreon, link also in the description. So, until next time, stay sketching, stay legendary, and have a nice day.